Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the dramatic final act of one of Japan's most celebrated heroes. His story was held up as the ultimate display of samurai loyalty, but his own last words tell a much darker, much more complicated story about the code he lived and died for.
So let's set the scene. It's Tokyo, 1912. The entire nation is mourning the Emperor Meiji, the man who guided Japan's incredible leap into the modern world. But as his funeral procession winds through the city streets, something else is happening. A quiet, private act that's about to send a jolt through the entire country.
In a nearby house, General Nogi Marasuke, a national hero, the very picture of samurai virtue, is writing his last words. And this isn't some glorious final message. It's a confession, really. Heavy with apology and a lifetime of what he saw as failure.
So, what was he doing? He was preparing for an ancient ritual called junshi, the act of following one's lord into death. Now, you have to understand, this was a practice that was already ancient and controversial. Even in 1912, it was pretty much a thing of the distant past.
And then, as the funeral cannon boomed across the city, Nogi and his wife both committed ritual suicide. The news would absolutely electrify the nation. Overnight, it sealed his legend as the last true samurai.
In the public imagination, this was it, the ultimate act of devotion. Nogi became an instant icon, the perfect embodiment of the warrior's code. But was his final act really about loyalty? Well, as we're about to see, the real story is a whole lot more complicated.
Okay, so to really get what's happening with Nogi, we first have to understand the ideal he was supposed to represent. We need to talk about the samurai code, Bushido.
Bushido, it literally means the way of the warrior. But it wasn't like a single rule book, you know? Think of it more as an ethical framework, a moral compass for the samurai, built over centuries from ideas in Buddhism, Shinto, and Confucianism. And at its core, you had all these key virtues. Things like courage, honor, and justice were all crucial. But there was one virtue that was often seen as the absolute pinnacle, the most important of all: loyalty.
And this quote, wow, it really captures just how extreme that ideal of loyalty could be. It's from a famous samurai text, and it's basically saying, it doesn't matter if your lord is wrong or cruel or just a bad leader, your job is to serve, no questions asked. This is the kind of absolute hardcore loyalty that Nogi's suicide seemed to represent.
But here's the thing. Was that ideal, that absolute blind loyalty, what samurai actually practiced throughout history? The record tells a very, very different story.
You'd think so, right? But when you dig into the history, you find a totally different picture. Far from being this settled, absolute thing, the idea of loyalty was actually fiercely debated by samurai themselves for centuries.
Yeah, really. Especially during the long period of peace in Japan, there was no single agreement on what loyalty, or chu, actually demanded. They argued endlessly about its limits and conditions.
Because in real life, loyalty wasn't so simple. I mean, what happens when your duty to your lord clashes with your duty to your parents? Or what about your own personal honor? And as society changed, those old feudal bonds started to weaken, and the relationship began to feel, well, a lot more like a regular job.
And this slide just nails that conflict. On one hand, you have the pure, selfless ideal. But on the other, you have thinkers like Kaiho Seiro who are basically saying, look, let's be real. This is a business transaction. My lord buys my service, and I sell it to him to buy my rice. It was a market reality.
Okay, so let's circle back to General Nogi. If the historical reality of loyalty was this messy, debated thing, then what truly drove him to commit this ancient ritual? Was it this pure storybook ideal, or was something else going on?
And it turns out his own words give us the answer. While he did mention following his emperor, his main reasons were all about atoning for his own failures. His suicide wasn't just an act of loyalty. It was the final, desperate chapter in a personal quest for honor.
Just look at the weight this guy was carrying. Back in 1877, he lost the emperor's own banner in battle, an unbelievable disgrace for a samurai. Then, during the Russo-Japanese War, both of his sons were killed in action, under his command. After the brutal siege of Port Arthur, where 56,000 of his men died, he was so crushed by guilt he begged the emperor to let him kill himself. The emperor's response? No. You will live, at least as long as I live.
So you see, when the emperor died in 1912, it wasn't just the loss of his master. For Nogi, it was like a lock had been opened. That imperial command to stay alive was finally lifted. After 35 long years, he was free to achieve the atonement he so desperately craved.
And this is the heart of it, right? You have the public hero of loyalty on one side, and the privately tormented man seeking forgiveness on the other. That duality defines Nogi's legacy, and in a lot of ways, the legacy of Bushido itself.
The public, of course, embraced the simpler story. They literally deified him, worshiping him as a divine spirit, a kami. Shrines were built in his honor. He became the ultimate symbol of pure sacrifice and unwavering loyalty.
Yet the complex reality remains. Historians today look at his military record, especially that staggering loss of life at Port Arthur, and they are deeply critical. They see a commander whose rigid tactics led to a horrific and perhaps unnecessary slaughter.
And this really is the story of Bushido in the modern era. What was once a complex, evolving, and often debated code of ethics for a warrior class got transformed into a simplified, powerful national myth about absolute loyalty and sacrifice.
And that simplified myth, the one embodied by heroes like Nogi, proved to be incredibly potent. It became a core part of Japan's modern identity, a narrative of discipline and selfless dedication used to explain everything from the nation's post-war economic miracle to its incredible resilience after disasters like the 2011 tsunami. Which leaves us with a final, really provocative thought. General Nogi's story shows us this huge gap between a messy personal history and a simple, powerful public myth, and it forces us to ask, when it comes to shaping a nation, its values, and its future, which is more powerful? The complicated truth or the simple, inspiring story we choose to tell ourselves?